needing. Don't want to waste more time. I'm in a New York state of mind. It was so easy.
Morning, sir.
How we doing?
Good.
Morning. All right.
Is he vertical also? Okay, you can be vertical. How are you? Andrew, Kevin, Ralph, introduce yourself. Mark, our producers. Say hi, guys.
Hello, Ralph. Hello, Mark.
Hello, Governor.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, this one's particularly special because the gist of it is, when the first time you met my father, you ever remember what he said to you?
I don't remember the verbatim. I remember the tone. I remember the general language. He was an intimidating guy, your father, you know. Now, I was probably 12, 13 years old at the time, right? But he was intimidating not because I knew that he was a reporter, columnist, big shot. He was just physically an imposing guy. By personality, he was a scary guy. He was loud. He was tough. He was gruff, you know. So I remember that. I remember having fun with him on the phone all the time. He would call. Your father and my father, they had like their own language. He would call. The phone was more like an intercom system because they were on it all the time. And your father would call, and my father would answer the phone, and all my father would say is, yup, just like that, yup. And they would start talking. So I would imitate my father answering the phone, and I would say, yup. And your father would just take off thinking he was talking to my father. That SOB, I was talking to him, I'm going to get him, and he did this. And he would go on like a 10-minute rant, curse words, all these things I had never heard at 12 years old, you know. And I would just listen to him. And then like after 10 minutes, I would say, oh, Mr. Breslin, I guess you want to talk to my father. You little, click. Oh, he was larger than life, your father.
But so was your father. And that's the essence of what we're doing here. And just so everybody knows, we're talking with Andrew Cuomo, who served as the 56th governor of New York from 2011 through 2021. And he's the son of Mario Cuomo, the only father and son team in New York history, who was our 52nd governor. And we're so happy to have you here. Now, my father was very careful with politicians. He didn't really trust many politicians. In fact, he didn't make friends with anybody. So in order for him to call a guy like Mario and be so close to him, it shows what a remarkable guy Mario was. Because my father had one quote. He said, Cuomo had one very bad flaw in his makeup. The silly son of a bitch actually believes. And that was about the Forest Hills Diary where they met, Forest Hills serving the housing corona crisis. Remember about that with corona at all?
Yeah, but you see, you have to remember, my father was not a politician when they met. That's why they bonded. Now, they had a lot of commonalities. They were from Queens, which meant you were from an outer borough. Outer borough. Queens is an outer borough, Brooklyn's an outer borough, Bronx is an outer borough. Well, what's the inner borough? Oh, there is none. There's no place called the inner borough. Well, how can you have an outer borough if you don't have an inner borough? Because the unspoken perception is Manhattan was the inner borough. And if you were a serious guy, you lived in Manhattan. And if you couldn't afford Manhattan, well, then you lived in an outer borough. But being in an outer borough defined who you were. It was a stereotype. You couldn't afford Manhattan. You weren't sophisticated enough. You weren't rich enough. So they were outer borough guys, which means they had a chip on their shoulder the size of a boulder to begin with, right? And that's where the working people lived. That's where the ethnics live. That's where the new immigrants live. That's where the blacks and the Latinos live. And that was their identity. They meet on what's called Corona, in Corona, Queens, which was so typical when you think about it. Mayor Lindsay wants to build a high school. And to build the high school, they're going to condemn 69 homes in Corona, Queens. Now, these were semi-attached homes, working class, lower working class, and taking 69 homes to build a high school and a ball field. And the ball field took up maybe half the homes. And these people, ethnic, Italian, Irish, working people, this is all they had was their home. And here comes City Hall saying, we're taking your home for a ball field and a high school. And we're condemning it. We're condemning. The old days when you could condemn. We're condemning it. And what are these poor little people? How are they going to fight City Hall? My father's a lawyer in Brooklyn and takes it on basically on a pro bono basis. You know, theoretically, they were supposed to pay, but they had no money. So they would pay in kind. They would come on Sundays and the bakery owner would bring bakery goods. The mason would come over and fix the steps. The electrician would come over and fix the electric. But it was a classic. When you think about your father, my father, it was a classic contest. City Hall versus the poor man, the common man, the outer borough man.
The underdog.
The underdog. And my father was their lawyer. Your father was just, you could see the attraction to him of this conflict of power versus the powerless. And that's where they met. And this thing went on for years. I remember as a kid going to weekend meetings every weekend with my old man, and the homeowners would all gather in like the local school club. And how do we beat City Hall? How do you beat City Hall? And my father was a Brooklyn lawyer. He was in a Manhattan lawyer, right? So he's a Court Street lawyer, which was like a second tier of law firms, right? Because you couldn't get into a Manhattan firm because you were Italian or you were Jewish or you were Irish. So that's where they met. And
you were an Ivy League. You were an Ivy League.
That's right. And my father was just representing these poor homeowners. Your father was attracted to the plight of the little guy. It went on for years, and that's where they met.
Yeah, my father said, a little local lawyer, someone said, Cuomo got up and spoke. And then I remembered that Congressman Hugh Carey telling me months earlier this. I got a genius nobody knows about. He's a law professor at St. John's. Brilliant son of a bitch. Nobody knows him. I begged him to run with me. The first time they ever hear of him, they'll be right there in his hands. And that's what my father saw in Mario.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, my father, he was a special guy, the way your father was a special guy. And they had a commonality. They were both brilliant in their own way, gutsy, tough guys. These were tough guys. Tough at home, tough with the kids, tough in a bar. They were just principled, tough guys.
Look, they grew up a half a mile apart from one another. I mean, you and me, my father, Mario, Catholics, working class, Queens, you go to Manhattan. I mean, the similarities in these two guys, they're so close that I always thought it was unusual for my father. And I think Mario had a quote, but it could have been my father's. He said, "We were a working class family and proud of it. No fancy trips, no country clubs for us. He was the working man's governor." And that my father was exactly the same way. We didn't take any trips. That's why I thought it'd be so interesting to talk to you. The similarities in these two guys from Queens blowing up so big and yet trusting one another. And politicians usually don't trust journalists and vice versa.
And vice versa. You're right. But again, he did not start as a politician. They were fighting a common fight in that Corona situation. And again, it went on for years, and that's where they bonded.
Yep. And we were always so proud to watch, like, your father's ascension. It was like, my father only respected, I think, two politicians, a few, but primarily that we were exposed to and told to really watch and respect. One was Mario, the other one was Bobby Kennedy. But Mario was closer. We could relate to you guys a mile away in Jamaica. We're in Forest Hills. So when your father kept going and grew, my father used the term when he arrived for governor and he won, a big guy arrives, a guy from the neighborhood who just made the rest of the nation shake.
Yeah.
And my father wrote very, very proudly and I think passionately about your father. Did that make your father feel good?
Well, first, your father was a combination of talents that are rare, right? He was a poet. He was just a magnificent, beautiful writer. And he was the voice of the people. So a poet who is the voice of the people. And I think your father, first, they were friends, let's be honest. Those days, a journalist was supposed to be objective. They were friends, but friends built on merit, right, from that whole Corona situation. And I think your father enjoyed seeing my father do well because your father believed this was the right kind of guy to do well in politics because they're all a bunch of bums in politics. And now here's a good guy. And maybe your father felt a sense of pride that he was one of the first to spot the talent, right? He was the talent scout. And then the guy made the major leagues.
Beautiful metaphor, 100%. Because he used the term, a big guy arrives.
But it was his story as well. You know, he's writing in his voice, which he always did, but he's writing his story. You know, it comes back to they were the outer borough guys. They were second-class citizens living in a second-class neighborhood. Jimmy's writing for the Daily News. The Daily News is not the New York Times. You're a tabloid journalist. You're not a New York Times journalist. Mario Cuomo, you're in a Brooklyn law firm. You're not in a Manhattan law firm. Your kids are going to school in Queens. You know, they're not going to the fancy Manhattan prep schools. So this is very much who they were. And there was a class tension. They really were the champions for what they believed was the little guy who was looked down upon by the powerful, rich elite. And they were not elitists. You know, the Democratic Party, to this day, right? Oh, the far left. You always had in the Democratic Party what they used to call in the old days the Manhattan elitists, the Manhattan liberal elitists, who were theoretical liberals, abstract liberals, ideological liberals, but they had no connection to reality because none of the things government did actually mattered to them, right? Whereas my father was a working class Democrat, right? And that's all the difference in the world. The working class Democrat, you're worried about the schools because your kids are going to them. You're worried about property tax because you're paying it, right? And it was all the difference in the world. And they were working class Democrats.
Your father said in Queens, we never thought of ourselves as coming from New York City. Manhattan was New York. You're right. We were bridge and tunnel people.
Well, you went, when you said we're going to the city, right? You went to the city is when you went to Manhattan.
Yep. I know. Do you think that they had to fight harder for respect? Or you said it, they had an edge?
Being in the Daily News, he had that chip that he was not in the New York Times on his shoulder. My father had that chip on his shoulder. He was not in a Manhattan law firm. He was in a Brooklyn law firm. You know, that was a very heavy chip that sat on their shoulder and was there forever. That was a lifetime.
I can't deny that. My father was in the 80s to tell you, yeah, why don't you take a walk if you know it's good for you?
Yes.
Okay, take a walk if you know what's MFing good for you.
Yeah.
F around with me, see what's going to happen to you. It'd be like, oh my God, he sounds like a thug. He's 80. It's like that chip never went anywhere, which his love for your father was so big that it was a Saturday or Sunday, I believe a Sunday. I walked into his apartment after our mother died. He moved him to Manhattan. I walked into his apartment bedroom. He was on the bed and he had two phones going. And he went to me like this, don't talk, don't talk. And his eyes get big. So I already know from growing up with this, you don't make a sound. Something's going on. So he's talking and talking. I'm listening and listening. He's going, yeah, good. And he hangs up and I said, Dad, what's going on? He said, Mario's going to announce. I said, what do you mean? He goes, president. I was thinking, oh my God, this is fantastic. We could maybe go to the White House. Selfish bastard I am. That's what I was thinking about. A trip to the White House. So my father's watching. He says, don't make a sound. They're going to announce on TV, blah, blah, blah. And so we're waiting and waiting and waiting. And I think he was talking to your father about the copy. Your father must have called him. They were talking about the copy or something. And then Mario didn't announce. And I saw my father break into hard news now. Like something was going wrong, like an operation collapse. He was calling somebody, yeah, click, boom, boom, boom. And he got nasty, Andrew. He sat up and I go, Pop, what? He wouldn't even talk to me. And I think that was his biggest heartbreak with your father when he didn't announce and run for president that day. Now, my father never held it against him, but I could see that was the first time that something really rattled him.
Yeah, no, it was, and it was.
I'm serious here, by the way. I never told you about this.
Yeah, no, it was true, and it was true for a lot of people. They were disappointed. They didn't understand. They had invested a lot in my father. He was their hope. And then why not? Why didn't you run? Why didn't you run? No reason not to. Now, my father was in the middle of a budget fight, and he said it would be wrong to run in the middle of a budget fight. But they said, like, who cares about the Albany budget, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Joe Bruno was the Republican leader at the time, and he would say, I can't make an agreement with Joe Bruno. But that wasn't really it, because he never got a budget done on time, my father. I worked so hard, frankly, to get budgets done on time. I got more budgets done on time than any governor in modern history, partially as a reaction to that, right?
There you
But
go.
he just, at the end of the day, he did not have the passion or the ambition for the job. And that was his strength and his weakness, my father, right?
That's what JP said. Yes, keep going. Exactly.
Yeah, like most of us, our strength is our weakness. He loved being governor. He loved what he was doing. He loved New York. He thought he was accomplishing and achieving well beyond what he ever expected for himself, coming from South Jamaica, Italian immigrant. So he knew that he didn't really have the stomach to do what you needed to do to run for president. He just didn't want it enough, Kevin. He said to me once, "What do you think? I'm going to walk across some field in Iowa and pat a cow on its rear end?" Except he didn't say rear end. But he was saying, I don't want to do this stuff. I'm not a grubby politician who's going to go out there and kiss babies and milk a cow and do these things that you do on the presidential trail. And by the way, he never did those things as a politician. Never. He was not. He was the anti-politician. He was not going to do that, what he considered degrading, pedestrian, pleading, almost disingenuous acts to show commonality with you. I'm going to milk your cow with you to show you, Farmer Kevin, that I relate to you. So I'm going to milk your cow. Milk your cow. How does that show that you have any commonality with the farmer, And you did have commonality with the farmer about beliefs and ideology and values, but not about milking the cow. You know what I mean? And he just thought it was cheapening and demeaning. But people did not get that. And frankly, because he didn't say, my father, he just kept talking about getting the budget done on time, which is not really what he meant. But the truthful explanation was almost too personal and too complicated to explain to people.
And my father told me, and he wrote about it, he said, maybe he knew it wasn't for him, and he was wise enough to know this was a limitation that he best be observed.
But see, that is a beautiful insight. It's a better way of saying what I just said with much fewer words. He was not capable of pretending, my father. When I say he was an anti-politician, he was not capable of the theatrics and the phoniness and the stunts that you needed to do. It's just, it was revolting to him.
It's funny you say that. Yep.
And because it was revolting, he was terrible at it. And yes, that was a limitation in politics. He did not have the capacity to do these retail political things that at that time, really, you had to do. This is before it was just a television campaign, a debate campaign, a big stage campaign where you go to a rally and there's 400 people. At that time, it was a very retail, state by state, Democratic committee people meeting in diners, sleeping in people's homes. That's not who he was. He thought it was pretentious, it was phony, it was a show, and he wouldn't have anything to do with it.
And it's funny you say that. Where the men parallel each other so much. As my father said, the office of president is a bastardized thing, half royalty and half democracy that nobody knows whether to genuflect or spit.
Oh, I love that line.
This episode of Breslin's What's Doing is brought to you by Advisor Insurance Group. Advisor Insurance resource experts in life, disability, long-term care, business, home, and auto insurance across the U.S. With over 60 insurance companies offered and over 30 years of combined experience, Advisor Insurance resource simply can't be beat. Call 866-942-4181 or on the web at advisorinsurancresource.com. Bamonte's at 32 Withers Street, Brooklyn, New York, is a family-owned and operated Italian-American restaurant that has been in business since 1900. It is the oldest Italian restaurant in Brooklyn and one of the oldest in New York City. Once again, try our delicious food at 32 Withers Street, Brooklyn, or call 718-384-8831. Bamonte's. EV Safety. Reduce your liability. Protect your customers and property. Keep insurance premiums down. Let EV Safety develop your facility's lithium-ion risk management plan with training, certification, and equipment. More U.S. cities are passing safety ordinances requiring on-site countermeasures to fight lithium-ion battery fires. EV fires are inevitable, as is your liability if you operate EV charging stations or park EVs on your property. When you have an EV battery fire on your property, a few minutes can make the difference between cosmetic and catastrophic damage. No company can afford a hazmat vent on their property. Contact us today for your evaluation on all your training and certification at evsafetyproducts.com. Once again, evsafetyproducts.com.
Which leads me into another area which your father fought tooth and nails and was steadfast about, where everybody says, oh, let's kill everybody. Everybody died, death penalty, fry them, the hell with them, to figure out it's going to create a better society. Your father didn't believe that.
Yeah, but and this is a combination of a couple of things. This is his sense of principle, religion, but more principle. Okay, so he killed someone. Assume you're right, which he didn't assume, but assume you're right, he killed someone. So what's our response? Well, we're going to kill him. Well, then you're no better than him. Well, the Bible says an eye for an eye. Yeah, but then everybody winds up blind. So we're not going to lower ourselves to the level of this person who we just condemned. Number two, what if you are wrong? This justice system, he was a lawyer. I had more experience in the justice system than he did. I wouldn't trust this justice system to make that kind of decision. Look, trusting this justice system to decide whether a person should be put behind bars for years, in my opinion, in many ways gives it too much confidence. About 1 in 20 convictions are wrong, proven wrong after the fact, right? Prosecutors are politicians. They're politicians. District attorney, attorney general, they're nothing but politicians. A lot of countries don't have elected prosecutors. They're professional prosecutors. So it's in their political interest to get in the newspaper and to look tough on crime. So you're really having a political system decide whether a person should live or die. U.S. attorneys, they're not elected. They're just as political as anyone else because the senator that is in power, the party in power appoints the U.S. attorney, and that senator appoints it, and that senator picks a person who that senator is going to use or make sure that person is beholden to that senator. So it is a political system. And you're going to use this political system to decide to kill people. 200 wrongful deaths since 1973. You killed 200 people wrongfully. And at that time, the death penalty was only for cop killers. So it was a red herring. Crime was up. Son of Sam is up. I'm afraid my daughter's going to get mugged. My fear I express as I want the death penalty. What is the death penalty going to do for your daughter being mugged? Absolutely nothing. But it was just a vent. It was just a primal scream by society. I'm afraid, so I want the death penalty, even though it's not going to be a deterrent that has nothing to do with anything. And my father was, I'm not going to facilitate your primal scream. I understand it. I have the same fear, but I'm not going to your level and I'm not going to pander to you. Death penalty, by the way, was at like 75% popularity. And it ultimately cost my father politically, because every time crime went up, the death penalty went up, even though there was no correlation between the two.
You're right.
But
people exploded against your father. But your father had one great line I can give you. He said, yes, I'm against the death penalty because I'm not an animal and you're not animals. What you do when you go out there is protect society, not the animals. So let me tell you something about this death penalty. Mistakes can be made. If you're going to tell me that as a society, we should say we're going to kill people, and occasionally we're going to make a mistake, and some kid and some family is going to do without a father who is innocent, you had better prove that it's a deterrent. Don't ask me for a statistic. You have to come up with them. Mario Cuomo.
Yeah, and also, look, let's be honest, what they knew. The justice system was always biased. It was always biased against the poor. It was always biased against the black and the brown. The prosecutor wanted a high conviction rate. So you came in, you were poor, you had a DA's office against you. The police were working with the DA's office. You had some legal aid lawyer or some corner lawyer. They said, here's the deal. If we convict you, you're getting 10 to 20. We'll give you a plea, you take 5. And you'll be out in 3. And the lawyer looked at the poor black kid and said, you better take the plea. And the prosecutor went out and said, I convicted. I have a 92% conviction rate. I put 47,000 people in jail. Yeah, it was the politicians' political agenda that drove it, and the poor paid the price. What you're now seeing is weaponization of the justice system, even against the rich and the powerful. But what the blacks and the browns are saying is, tell me about it. It's been happening to us for 50 years.
Now, my father supported Mario and had the exact same feelings. Again, the similarities in the men. Irish Catholic, Italian Catholic, big families, Queens, blue collar, rough go to start out in life. But my father said exactly what Mario said. He said, I know of no way to become more popular with a typewriter than to type out angry sentences calling for people to be thrown into the electric chair in retaliation for the death of a policeman. And I know no greater fakery than to do so. For punishment is nothing more than an attempt to fool people into feeling that at least something is being done about crime. Just what you said.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
and
both our
racism.
fathers were very controversial guys.
Yes. Yes. And proud
Not
of it. But it's not easy. You know, I think of my own man. Making change is hard. Politicians do not want disruption. They do not want controversy. They want people to smile and be happy. The problem is change is hard because change is disruption. And there is nothing that I did, Kevin, where there was not significant disruption. I go to rebuild LaGuardia Airport,
great
the
job.
worst airport in the country. The opposition against rebuilding LaGuardia, against Second Avenue Subway, against marriage equality, gay marriage. The first big state in the nation to pass it. We changed the whole dialogue where now every Democratic governor had to answer the question, will you pass gay marriage? Yeah, 60% of the people were against it. The Catholic Church, the way they threatened my father with excommunication for his position on abortion. The Catholic Church, I go to church with my kids, and from the pulpit, they read a letter condemning me for the proposal of gay marriage and telling the parishioners to go tell the assemblymen and senators to work against it. It was probably the greatest single progressive achievement, the greatest thing I did legislatively in my life. And the Catholic Church, in front of my kids, makes it sound like I am the spawn of Satan, you know? So it's always been hard. And that's why you see now, in many ways, the political system has given up. They don't even try to make change anymore. You know, they're not, what big reform is anyone trying to do? What is anyone trying to build? What is anyone trying to pass? They're all trying to pander. We came from an upbringing that said the exact opposite. You don't pander, you challenge.
You know, you called my father a lion, but your father was a lion too. I mean, it sounds a little effusive. We're sons talking about our fathers, but wait a minute here. We're not little rich boys. Things were handed to us. We came rolling up our sleeves. You know,
100%. 100%. We were Queens. Look, we came from the same place, right? We're Queens boys. One of the real sadnesses that I have, your father, who I called a lion, I was one of the speakers at his eulogy. I worship your father, and he was a role model. Just his courage and his impact. He was very unhappy with me for many, many years. And your sister, Rosemary, God rest her soul, who was a dear friend of mine, and what a beautiful talent, and what a beautiful writer. I mean, she had your father's gifts. And what a beauty on every level. She tried to help me with him. There was a good friend of mine was a fellow named Michael McAlery, who was a columnist.
Sure.
Wound up winning the Pulitzer Prize, but he was a good friend. He was in my bridal party. But your father felt that he was copying your father's style.
Mm-hmm.
And in truth, he was not copying, he was emulating, because your father was the god, right? Your father was the man. He was the voice. So in many ways, Michael, on the theory of imitation is the greatest flattery, but your father did not like him, because he was a real guy too, Michael. What your father felt was ripping off, so to speak, his style. And because Michael was a friend of mine, he got very annoyed at me, wouldn't talk to me. And Rosemary went to him, and I tried a few times. Michael wound up dying young, tragically. But it was one of the great periods of unhappiness was when your father was unhappy with me because of that situation.
That's so honest, because I remember you came to me one night and you said to me, I don't know if you remember, you said, "Why is your father like this with me?" And I couldn't even answer that, because my father was like that too often with people. But you, it was particularly bothersome because we weren't brought up like that. But he would harbor these grudges about a McAlery or anyone like that. I mean, they wrote the play, The Lucky Guy, Nora Ephron, about McAlery, but really it was about Breslin. He was he played the single, and I used that line earlier. He didn't like anybody around him, didn't like anybody knowing much. Talk about a small circle of friends. Your father, he said he could count them on one hand. My father, you could count them on his hand himself. He talked to me a little, James or Rosemary. He was very alone and very protective. So he didn't like anybody even getting on his turf. Yeah. I remember once telling him I'd share a story with another writer whom we know, and he told me, "Shut your mouth. Tell anybody anything." I was thinking, well, you might not be interested, Pop. He goes, "I don't care. If it's in the air, it's in the air." So he got so protective about stories that he was myopic. He had no friends when it came to this, except maybe a Jack Newfield or a Murray Kempton, both of whom admired your father and you. But and Pete Hamill, very few people. Andrew, he was very cold in this regard, man. Yeah. But yet he would talk to your father now. Now that's different, Mario. But these other guys, I hate to be blunt with you, fuck them. Fuck them. Yeah. That's how we do, man.
Well, so I go to my father during this McAlery thing. And I said, "Will you talk to Jimmy?" I didn't want anything. I just didn't want him unhappy with me. My father said, "You talk to Jimmy." He would not. He knew your father so well. And he knew there was no point in my father trying to get involved. He said, "You're going to have to talk to Jimmy," because that was Jimmy. Nobody was going to intervene. Nobody was going to change Jimmy's mind. Nobody was going to say, "Well, come and give him a break. He's my son." Forget it. Talk to Jimmy. Was all he said.
Oh, we could go to therapy on this bullshit. Oh my God.
I was helping my father since I was young in his campaigns because it was the right thing to do. Also, he was so consumed with his work that the only way to really spend time with him was to help him in his work, because he worked 7 days a week. So I think I got involved in the campaigns from the time I was 16 years old as a way to get close to him, spend time with him. And that continued through my 20s. But there was a period where I was saying to myself, I would do the exact opposite because this life stinks. It was nasty. It was controversial. It was whatever you did, it wasn't enough. So I was going to do the exact opposite. I went to the Manhattan DA's office and I sort of came around in my 30s. I appreciated it more, I think, and the upside of it. Where I had just seen the downside, I appreciated the upside, which is you can do really big things. And that was the upside. I then had a second reaction to my father, which I didn't even appreciate at the time. My father loses election, 94, and they write his political eulogy. And his political eulogy is Mario Cuomo, great speaker, didn't get much done as governor. Simplification, but basically that. Great speaker, great orator, could have run for president, but didn't have a lot of accomplishments as governor. That cut him to the bone. And this is after 94. And I run for governor in 2000, lose, step out of the race. I become attorney general 2006. I become governor 2010. My father's alive. 16 years, my father's sitting on the couch replaying the game. I should have done this. I should have done this. I should have done this. I should have had more tangible accomplishments like Rockefeller, built things. Now they say all I did was give a good speech, like I'm a good talker, but I'm not a doer. I was all words, no action. And I remember saying to him many times, but even on election night, when I am finished, nobody will ever say the Cuomos did not deliver for New York. So my administration, I was hell-bent on actually accomplishing things that touched people, that were tangible and tactile and made a difference in your life. Marriage equality gave you a civil right. Scholarships to state schools up to $150,000, highest minimum wage in the nation, changed your life. Airports, bridges, roads, changed society. That was all as a reaction to my father's political obituary, in a way that I don't even know that I fully appreciated. But I knew when I became governor, I was going to correct for that pain or omission that people talked about for him. And that's why I built a bridge across the Hudson River, the old Tappan Zee Bridge, which they had said was going to fall down for 50 years. But nobody ever rebuilt it because, again, it's hard to actually do something. You can say you're going to do it. They named the Moynihan Train Hall in the 90s, but then nobody built it. Tappan Zee, they were going to rebuild. 4 governors said they were going to build it. Nobody built it. So I built it and I named it for him, Governor Mario Cuomo Bridge. And for me, that was just the perfect metaphor. Here's this, it was the largest infrastructure project in the United States of America, that bridge. Largest in the nation. Barack Obama came. On time, on budget, points to the sky. These two arches, which are the V's, they look like sign of peace or victory, but they're just opening to the heavens is how I saw it. And it's the Mario Cuomo Bridge. There it is, bang. Largest infrastructure project, $4 billion, beautiful, improved society, and it has his name on it.
It's absolutely beautiful bridge. Every time I drive over it, I just smile and think of Mario.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you had one last thing I'd like to say, and I'd like to thank you, but it's apropos for both our fathers. But you said in the passing of Jimmy Breslin, we lose an authentic voice for New York. He was the people's voice, a great New York character, and a great friend. And I know I consider myself your friend, and I thank you for your time. And the same words could be said about your father and your great mother, Matilda, whom we love and we spoke with. And she's a woman of tremendous character and class. So, Andrew, thank you so much. You guys, any thoughts?
Thank
Mark?
you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It was wonderful getting to talk to you. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure very much.
Andrew,
And
thousand.
Kevin, and your mother. I remember your mother many times in our kitchen talking to my mother.
Your blue Formica counter.
Yes, exactly right. Well, that was living large. That Formica, that was state of the art. You were living large with that Formica.
It was blue, right?
Yes, it was. Isn't Formica naturally blue?
I'm a moron. Don't ask me. All right. I love you, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
God
guys.
bless.
Good to talk to you.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Thank you, Governor.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, guys.
I'm taking a Greyhound